and for, so I've explored a lot of different preservation techniques. So I was just curious what techniques you use mainly, and what species in particular you're most interested in preserving currently, which ones you see as being the most kind of pertinent perhaps for our survival or for the local ecosystems in Valencia. So if you could just talk a little bit about that.
Sorry, I'm going to ask Elena if she can introduce me to you. I don't know who you are.
Sorry.
No, I don't know the group. I don't know if you're a biologist, botanist, artist.
No, I'm an artist. Yeah, we're all artists.
Yeah, all artists. We are all artists, Olga. Here is there are only artists who is going to make a collaboration with your garden.
Okay.
Actually, there are 3 artists who are going to work with Botanical Garden, and the other ones, they are going to work with another department of Biomarine department.
Science. Yeah, with Antonio Raga.
Yeah, but they are all join us today just to be curious. But we have 3 artists, Taylor, Sarah, and Jan Thomas. You have already known him. Today to ask you some questions concerning the Botanical Garden. Please, each artist, can you introduce yourself before, please?
Yeah, just 1 minute, so I know a little bit.
Yeah.
Sure, I guess, yeah. I'll go first. But so yeah, I'm Taylor Smith. I'm based in Paris, and I've been working with, collaborating with Botanical Gardens actually now for about 4.5 years. So mainly in France and also a bit in Belgium. So I usually kind of recycle a lot of the materials that are sort of misused or given away in Botanical Gardens. So lots of leaf waste, plant waste, and I incorporate them into installations, prints, and many things. So I've worked on preserving a lot of these that I recover, so to speak, sometimes while they're still alive. So that's why I'm interested in preservation techniques.
Okay, super, thanks.
I don't know if anyone else wants to.
So your questions is about the preservation.
Okay, you want me to answer, okay?
I guess, yeah, I don't know if people
okay. You mean for the herbarium?
Yes, and then if you are familiar with other
processes as well. The general way is just getting the plants. We've got press machines. We combine pressure with heat. I suppose they do it the same in all the botanical gardens. Well, first, botanists go out to the wild and get plants. They come back. It's not very common to get the plants from the garden, only sometimes. We normally go to the countryside, we get the plants, we press them, then combining pressure and heat, it normally works well, but with succulents, it's very difficult. With orchids, it's very difficult, and many are endangered and protected by law. So it is not possible to get from some orchids. And normally orchids they take photographs, really good macro photographs, and they don't press them, but in some occasions, yes. And then they go into the freezer. When they are already pressed and dry, they go to the freezer for 15 days to make sure that all the insects and larvae and eggs are dead. Because, the major enemies of herbariums are insects and fungus. So they go there, and then they go up to the herbarium. And then, for example, last week we had an enterprise that came to the herbarium and made a fumigation, and we couldn't enter for a couple of days because they keep. And then the herbarium is kept with low humidity and low temperature, so it helps the preservation. But we always have problems with plants from agave or puntia or cactus, which don't press well. And if you press them, they're destroyed. So you don't get a good specimen. You don't get a good dry specimen. So normally, common plants, orthodox plants, dry properly. But we have problems with some of those species that are really made of a lot of water. And even when you press them, they recover, and you see them growing from afterwards. So it's like amazing how they are prepared to persist. And let me see the other part of the questions. The key species that are more challenging and urgent to preserve. I think one of the big problems we've got sometimes is the really endangered species. So when you find something that you know that is important and is new, on one side, you should get a specimen for the herbarium because you need to put the number in the publication, but you know it's an endangered species. You don't know how many more individuals of that species are around. And sometimes it's difficult to make the decision, shall I get a piece or not for the herbarium? But it's true that other species have been recovered from seeds that were left in the folders of the herbariums. And there have also been some molecular biology research, very interesting on these specimens. So always, if possible, we get the pieces of all these plants.
Okay. Yeah. If maybe later, if Elena could direct us to some of that research, if you could send some links, that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, and then you also included the question of seed preservation.
I think
the concept of plant and or seed preservation pose any significant environmental or ethical problems. So first thing we have to do is when we get seeds, also try to go to the wild, not get the seeds from the botanical garden, because there the species are domesticated, they're used to that environment, and we want to make sure that in the future, if we want to help wild populations to recover, we need seeds from wild environments. So we go out and we try to get from as many individuals as possible to make sure that we have the highest genetic variability as possible. So that wide range of variation within the genes will enable that species to adapt to different possible conditions. And then if it's a population that is very endangered with only some individuals, we have to make sure that we get only some of the seeds each year, so that those plants are also living seeds for the seed bank, for the natural seed bank of the environment. So we need that to continue working, but we also need to get the seeds for our seed bank in order to establish the protocols that may save the species. And we can make sure that those seeds are really well preserved and really we make them germinate, and we can keep more individuals. And so sometimes it's difficult how many to get, but you know more or less how many the plants are, how many seeds are giving, and then you make calculations to make sure it's not a problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Olga. We have also actually the interesting questions from Sarah about the trees, because she's working with the forests. Sarah, can you ask your questions, please? Because, you know, to read it, it's more complicated. You asked about what fungus is killing something like
eucalyptus.
Explain better maybe your questions, you know.
Yes, hello. I was wondering about the fungus of who is killing eucalyptus in the south of France, and I am wondering if eucalyptus are killing by fungus just in the south of France or everywhere, and if you know what fungus is it and why is it there a relationship between climate warming. I'm sorry, my English is not really good, and the fungus and everything.
Okay, so I can answer to you partially because I'm not expert on this. I've been working a lot with invasive species, so I know the problem of eucalyptus, and luckily it is not a problem in our region, in the Mediterranean region. It is a big problem in northern and northwestern Spain, Galicia, Asturias. There it is a big problem because they've got acid soils, and eucalyptus provoke an acidification of the soil. So they have already acid soils, and then eucalyptus make these soils even more acid. And they have destroyed most of the natural environments with oak trees in order to plant pine trees and eucalyptus. And I know many people are really happy because now they're being attacked by fungus, eucalyptus. So it's like, okay, this invasive species now is being controlled by a natural agent, which are fungus. But I don't know about these fungus, but I've been asking a colleague from mine from the Polytechnic University. She works with this, and if you're interested, I could.
You can send us some contact or email or answer from.
Exactly. Maybe she would be happy to help you.
Okay.
And she's from the Polytechnic University of Valencia. So it's the other public university, the second biggest. And she works with this. But I must tell you, here in the Mediterranean Spanish area, we have no problems with eucalyptus. Eucalyptus need, the ones that are planted here need more rain, and they don't live here. Where they plant them, they live, but they don't become invasive. We have no problems with them, and they're more ornamental trees than a reality in our forests.
Okay.
Luckily for us.
Yes. So yes, if it's possible, to have the contact, it would be great for me.
There is both points, both positions helped me to go in several botanical gardens, and that long trip as beginning 2 years ago when I was practicing botanical gardens in Romagna, in 4 botanical gardens, after I was in New York in the Botanical Garden of New York. And this was a link with United Nations at that moment in September as a plant, and you know that project. And in the right link of that, I wanted to talk about El Arca de Noé del Botanic. that project I mentioned you. It was the idea is because there was that period of coronavirus. It was very important for me to give me some intuitions and ideas to develop how to show that. And now my intention is to create a fiction around Noah's Ark, El Arca de Noé del Botanic, that would have been in progress in the Botanical Garden of Valencia in the 20s and of the 20th century. Then there would be a cartel very faithful to the scientist presentation you use in the garden to identify plants. There would be photographs, of course, of the herbaria that would have been established at the time to imagine the protection of the species present in the botanical garden. And the idea would be, through the presentation of my work, to imagine a contemporary vision of what could be a contemporary Noah's Ark based on current research and a secure and protected aesthetic to allow the seeds and the plants to resist their disappearance. And the presentation of this work would be with some writings, and there will be a novel about that fiction, then a novel about the story of the creation of that Noah's Ark in the 20s. And it will be inscribed directly in the framework of the botanical garden. Then one-to-one end, we would have the presentation of the cartels within the framework of the garden. I have seen that you have small labels then with a common name, scientific name, place of origin, things like that. Then this will be some cartels all around the garden, and there will be a sort of archaeological place where the Ark of Noé was supposed to be in the 20s, then it's a sort of architecture. Then I have to find maybe places with the percent of the botanical garden to identify a place in the botanical garden where there was focused and presented. And there will be, of course, a presentation of photographies of hybridations, which means that that species of the botanical garden have muted to a new species who will be in possibility of resist to the disappear of the seeds and different common species of today. Then it will be a mix between fiction and reality. And at the end, it will be great to work with biologists to think about a sort of modelization of an herbarium which can be really close to the idea of the hybridation of the fiction, then to make appear species, new species for the future, but which are inspired by the research of the 20s, reflection of the entire botanical garden and the relation with the public.
Yeah, I think that kind of project is super interesting because it can make our job attractive to a wider public. Sometimes we're not so able of showing the attractiveness of what we do because we're really occupied with that work and we're not worrying about how to tell the citizens what we're doing. So I find it is very attractive. I also think there's something we don't work much on it, and is visual thinking. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we try to explain things writing down, and I think artists are able of giving this visual part that we're not good in it. So I think that's a really good potential. I also think there needs to be a lot of communication between the artist and the scientist to make sure that the message that is given is real. That's not, because sometimes when we're telling things, we can end up telling other things. So to keep the equilibrium between attractiveness and reality and it needs a really relationship between those parts. And I suppose I could put you in contact with some people that could help you in that part. Of course, I could also help. The director of the Botanical Garden knows the history really well. And the director that made possible the building of the research building we've got now, who is Manuel Costa. He's retired, he's quite old, but he's very active and he speaks English. He knows a lot about the history. I wonder how much, in general, scientists are not really happy to go out from their shelter and to go to other areas. But maybe he's retired and maybe he would be interested. And he's a very interesting person. And I'm sure he could also give you, because he's got the perspective of the botanical garden from the 70s of last century. So he's been for 50 years following the evolution of the garden. So I think it would be a really good point of view for your proposal.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think the storytelling is very important in that kind of project. And it should be great to find several levels of apprehension of that storytelling. And it could be some printings, or it could be some elements of explanation. And what I was wondering is it possible to be connected with the platform, maybe an archivist platform of biology with herbarium, then maybe there is some elements, scientific elements I can check to be inspired by all the names in Latin or in Spanish or in English. I don't know.
If there's an online or digital platform so that you can get the ideas. I know they're building it, but I don't know in which state they are, because they were just in the middle when we had to go to our houses, and I don't know if the implementation is already. I think it's not, because we should be able of from the website of entering, but the objective is to be able of going to our website, going to their barrio, and making a virtual visit, so you could go and see all those inspiring folders with images of with the oldest ones until the most recent, with the handwriting or just with the computer. You would have, and the most important folders with the species, well, with the specimens that have been used to describe a species, which are the red folders. So that will be available, but I don't think it's available these days, which is a pity, because that's something you could be using from your house.
Yeah, of course. But maybe I will check with the person you will mention to me, then maybe I can join them and begin a discussion. It's very important for the inspiration. I had a question more global. This maybe will interest all my colleagues too, and researchers. Then the conversation, there is a relation now to the diversity, about the diversity of the vegetables and the conservation of species, rare species. Then there is a reflection of you about all of that. And do you think that kind of reflection make a change in the botanical garden and their own research? Is there that urgency of the climate change or about all that transformation of the world with the climate change is affected the priorities of the botanical garden? Is there a consequence of that for you?
There is, and there's so much that we have made. We've got the Ibero-Macaronesian Organization of Botanical Gardens. That means all the botanical gardens from the Iberian Peninsula, including Portugal, the Azores Islands, the Madeira, Canary Islands. All the botanical gardens from those areas they work together with the same objectives. And now one of the priorities is to focus on how climate change will affect our collections, living collections, but also seed bank. And we have signed, how do we say this? Well, the botanical garden from made a declaration saying that botanical gardens will try to act as pilots to study the evolution, because we've got botanical gardens spread all around the world. So we can be focusing on several species that we've got in all the botanical gardens and see how they are evolving all around the world. And we have to be really committed in climate change issues. So they signed this paper and we have signed it also. And we will have a meeting in 2 years' time in Australia in order to establish the basis in which we will say, okay, how are botanical gardens going to help regarding climate change? And how are we going to help our cities? Because we are green lands in the cities, and we have a lot of experience in cultivating many species in our climates. So we can help municipalities and our cities in order to choose the correct species for our cities, in order to choose the species that give freshness in summertime, a good shadow, a lot of shade. They're good in absorbing CO2. So we can give a lot of information that could be very useful for the gardeners of the, for gardening of the cities. So we want to be committed not only with the preservation of species from natural areas, but we can also help the cities. So we are now working on this like work package, saying, okay, how are we going to help? What can we do regarding this? And so we're really working on that part.
Thank you very much. It's,
I hope I have answered somehow your response.
But you just mentioned that this is not only useful for helping population to know things about species. You have a real function in the city.
Yeah, and that's something that we are developing now, because we've been really focused on preservation of endangered species, always thinking of natural areas, of how can we help to preserve those species, okay, what we call ex situ conservation. So we have in situ conservation.
If you know anything
Which
about
species? You mean succulent in general and cacti in general, or a species in concrete?
No, as the agave americana.
Agave americana, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
okay.
Yeah, so we know that species entered to Europe through the Botanical Garden of Padova in northern Italy. We've got that data, and it's botanical gardens are also useful because we've got the date of entrance of many species that came from America. The Botanical Garden from Padova is the oldest in the world, and they've got these data, and it's something you can find when you see there. They tell you this information. So many of these species that have become invasive have been brought through botanical gardens, which are preservation sites. But things have been changing along the years, and of course it is not a problem to plant these species in our gardens in the cities. Always the problem is when you take them to natural areas. So now what our mindset is, okay, we can teach a lot about invasive species from the botanical gardens. So for example, in our botanical garden, we've got a route that you can make to know which are the species that are really invasive in Mediterranean areas. And then you can make this route and learn about them, and learn that you shouldn't be planting them out from your house, that they're being very problematic in sand dunes, in very arid places. So Agave americana is one of the stars. It's one of the top 10. And, but it is also a very important species for native people in their native areas. So we have to tell both parts of the story, no? It's a very important species in its area. It's horrible here, and we've got some species that are really nice for us that are being very problematic in America. Change from the 15th century. In the end, America lost because we took them many more invasive species than the ones we brought. So we not only invaded them, but we also took many species that are endangering their natural areas. Agave americana and the other species, we've got 2 or 3 species of agave in our region, Agave cisalana, that has been planted a lot to obtain fibers for clothing and for ropes. It's horrible. They're becoming horrible, and they reproduce sexually and asexually. So they also reproduce from the roots, and some of them haven't got the pollinators here, so they cannot give fruits. But if they don't give fruits, then they give like little plants that are clonic, and they spread. So it is a terrible species for us, but we've got it in the botanical garden, and we've got it outside, which is very different from all the botanical gardens in the rest of Europe. We've got agaves and opuntias and all the cacti out. because we've got a very mild climate. So it's a very nice and attractive collection. And we use it to try and teach how dangerous it is to have an homogenization of the flora of the world, because we could be losing many species that are specific from each area with a lot of potential. So we should really try to be very careful with this. Do it with lichens and with other groups that are included in botany of fungus, which are not plants, but they're in the departments of botany. So they use it in other groups of organisms. And when I saw the question, I thought, okay, maybe we could be thinking of that possibility with succulents, because maybe you can
have a few strategies. But they're not very scientifically valid, I don't think so.
No, of course, they wouldn't last really long, but maybe for some years, yes.